What's up, everyone? How's everyone doing? So I'm super excited to be here today. We're going to be talking about something we at Blueboard think about a lot, which is this concept of organizational empathy, right? Some of the things we're going to cover, why I believe experiences are better than material things, why innovation is a horrible company value. I got some peaks. That's a controversial one. And then we're going to be talking about how to kind of build culture by empathizing with the state of your employees. And so to start off, right, my thought is we can take some lessons from the animal kingdom, right? Elephants, incredibly emotionally intelligent creatures, right? And so they've been seen mourning their dead. They've been seen helping the physically disabled elephants, plucking out tranquilizer darts, dusting wounds, right? And so in 2014, researchers wanted to study, are elephants empathetic, right? How do they console the distressed, right? And so they studied 30 elephants at a park in Thailand. And what they found was that when there was a distressed elephant bystanders would gather around and they would console it, right? They would rub it, they would chirp, no worries, in ways that the researchers said were reassuring, right? And so elephants were able to kind of see and observe the emotional state of another elephant and act upon it to make them feel better. Pretty incredible. The next is rats. Can we turn up the brightness? Are you guys having a hard time seeing? We can deal with it. Everyone loves rats, such cute little things. But so there was an experiment kind of created, and it was really interesting. And so there was this clear box, right? And the box was partitioned, right? On one side, there was a pool of water where a rat was in. It wasn't going to drown, it was just a shallow pool. Rats apparently hate water, right? And on the other side, there was a dry kind of compartment with a rat, right? And the only way the watery rat, we'll call it, could get out is if the dry rat pushed open a door to let out the water and let the watery rat in on the dry side, right? And so what they found over a couple of days is all of the dry rats opened this door to kind of save their watery friend, right? But what was interesting in the second iteration was they put the watery rats on the dry side. And what they did is they actually solved kind of how to get the other rat free 10 times faster, right? And they concluded that by being on the watery side, those rats were able to empathize with the others and work and feel more motivated to free them. Super interesting. The researchers, they weren't happy with this yet. They wanted yet another iteration. And so they actually gave the dry rat a choice. And so they said, hey, on one choice, right, the rat could eat a piece of chocolate, right? Pretty good for a rat, right? And the other, save their kind of watery friend. What percentage do you think of the rats were actually saved versus eating the piece of chocolate? Any guesses? 0%. That's what I would think too. So, do you wanna guess? It's not 0. It's a little higher. Yeah, 30%, 50. I heard 50. 80%. Pretty incredible, right? 4 out of 5 rats decided to forego the piece of chocolate. Basically, right? That's why we can learn a thing or two from. That's why I'm starting this off, right? Yeah. And so what do these share, right? If you read this session, right? They share, the commonality is their high degree of empathy, right? They've evolved and developed this emotion and instinct to understand others, right? And to act upon it to be helpful, right? For survival, right? And so when we think of empathy, right? In animals, in ourselves, right? It's triggered reactively, right? We observe the conditions and state of another, right? We work to process and understand it. And then hopefully, like these rats and like these elephants, we become helpful, right? And so when thinking about empathy, right, how do we leverage this kind of natural, sentient kind of thought process to build culture, to build better experiences for our employees? And it seems like a big jump from animals to companies, but it's really not, right? And the idea is about being proactive, right? Empathy is triggered naturally reactive, and as a company to leverage it, we have to be proactive. And so shared language, the definition. So organizational empathy is a company's and organization's ability to understand the thoughts, feelings, fears, dreams, motivations, conditions of another, right? And that other being their employees, their customers, their competitors, right? The communities, right, in which they operate, and their partners, right? From their respective point of view. And so a little bit about me, it's a blurry picture, but the reason why I'm talking about this today is because, starting Blueboard was very much, from my experience being in what I would call a low empathy organization, right? And so I was 22 at the time. I just graduated, and I was working at a big firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so I was an accountant, very fun, sexy job. And I was placed on a project, right? And so in the beginning of it, had a couple team members quit and ended up working 90 to 100 hour weeks for about 2.5 months. I got some eyes. It was not fun, right? But I was young and I was ambitious, and I decided to say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna do this, right? And so over the course of the project, while I was excelling, while I was getting this work done, my personal life was kind of falling apart. I was 25 pounds heavier by the end of the project. My girlfriend at the time was on the verge of breaking up with me because I was never present, literally. I was working 7 days a week. And when I was with her, I was either sleeping or super grumpy, right? True story. And at the end of it, my manager came up to me and said, hey, Kevin, amazing job. Like, you literally carried this engagement. Thank you so much. And she kind of put down an Amex gift card and like slid it over to me. And, it felt like kind of the straw that broke the camel's back a little bit. But for me, it was incredibly impersonal, right? It felt really transactional, right? And it lacked any thought. And I don't know if you've given, a relative a gift card, right? But it's kind of like that cop-out gift, right? Because you just don't really know you don't really know them. You don't know how to personalize it. You haven't put any thought into it, right? And so the idea and kind of impetus for this company, Blueboard, was, hey, imagine if instead my manager had come up to me and said, hey, Kevin, I know you've been really frustrated with your health, right? And I know you love boxing. I actually got you a boxing membership to the gym around the corner. Or hey, I know you and your girlfriend haven't spent much time together. Why don't you take her out to a nice dinner date, right? Same cost, and just it's almost as easy as that gift card. But imagine how much more personal and thoughtful that would have felt for me as the employee, right? Incredibly high empathy in that interaction, right? And so that kind of got us going. Is like, all right, how would we empower companies, empower teams and managers to be thoughtful, right? To recognize their employees with something they actually care about, right? And so, when we started this company, it got me thinking like, hey, how do organizations, including our own Blueboard, right, connect with our employees, right? Because you're talking about an organization, it is naturally not human, right? Empathy is a human trait, right? How would you connect with your employees? And so we're gonna talk a lot about that. And so part of our journey has been, when we started this company, I wanted the company to be, hey, when our employees looked back at their careers, I wanted them to say, like, this is the best effing company I've ever worked for, right? So much meaningful work, such a cool team, feeling super supported, right? And this type of empathy in how we've built our company, comes, manifests itself in planning team events, our performance reviews, our learning and development, right? Just how we talk about the business. 2 quick numbers to share. One is kind of 2, which is the number of voluntary turnover we've had since 2015. We're about 85 employees now. We've lost 2 people. Each kind of loss, we learned something different. But I think I'm super proud of that, especially being in the Bay Area when the talent market is so competitive. And then 4.5 out of 5 is our engagement score, right? On our recent survey. And so what I'm really proud of is that I think these indicators, one, we've been super intentional with improving them. They didn't just start like this, right? And we've leveraged organizational empathy as a way to kind of contextualize and drive how we invest in our people, in our culture. And so why does organizational empathy matter now more than ever, right? And so how we view work especially young people, is changing, right? And so there's this shift, right? In the late kind of 20th century, people thought of their work lives and personal lives as completely separate, right? You came in at 9, you clocked out at 5, you didn't bring work home, right? And so for that, it was really nice, right? Like I had my work life, I had work friends, I had my personal life and personal friends, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s, that was being encroached on, right? Technology connected us and work became too consuming, right? We brought work home, right? We got calls at night. And so now it was this ideal of striking a balance between the two, right? Became what we strove for, right? And so still people talk about this today, right? The idea of work-life balance. How do we create work-life balance for our employees? Today, the initial separation is long gone, right? And the balance is shifting, right? And so what I love about kind of how we perceive work today is employees want to work for companies they're proud of, right? That they have a shared belief system and outlook on the world, right? And so as more employees kind of choose their work and choose their jobs that reflect more of who they are, right? Work becomes more integrated and more fluid in our lives, right? So this idea of work-life integration is what we call it. And so, with this shift to integration, right, expectations are changing, right? People want purpose in what they do, in their work, in their companies. They also want a paycheck, but they want purpose. They prioritize personal, professional growth over balance, right? And people want to be friends with their coworkers. They want to have a relationship with their team, their managers, their organization, right? And so how do you kind of build those relationships, right? At scale, right, across a company. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, and so with this shift to integration and kind of these changing expectations, right, I think it's incredibly important, and why I love coming to these types of conferences is because the people that have the ability to influence how our companies are built, right? We need to not only support the business with the people we bring on, right? We'll always do that, right? We'll always support the business with the people we bring on. But we need to equally support the people that serve the business, right? And so how I like to think about it and how I like to talk about it is we need to support the whole self of our employees, right? And how many people talk about bringing your whole self to work? I love it. Awesome. And so the whole self, shared definition once again, right? It's everything. It's not just work, right? Work is just one component. Family, friends, personal and professional development, right? Self-expression, as Willie was talking about, right? Personal passions. All of these make up equal parts of a person's self. And so what organizational empathy is, there's little dots connecting work to everything else, is the ability to acknowledge and understand these other parts of an employee's whole self, right? And when it makes sense for the business, work to support those, right? Supporting those passions, supporting those identities, right? Nice cloud cover. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about, the components of organizational empathy and kind of how it manifests itself in the workplace. So 5 components: resources, benefits, places, spaces, leadership, and then lastly, values. And so on the resources side, simply put, resources solve an employee need, right? They fill a void. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we do at Blueboard, and also kind of ask for you to chime in if you have any ideas. And so one of the things, when we were young, we decided to open a second office in San Diego, right? And it's a huge culture change in a startup, right? You're kind of all in the same room, working on a problem. You're often working late, right? People feel like they can come and talk to you very fluidly, right? And then we opened the second office and we realized, hey, that's gonna change a lot, right? The people that are in San Diego versus San Francisco are not gonna feel as connected to myself and my co-founder who are sitting up in San Francisco, right? And so to get ahead of it, we were like, all right, how do we make ourselves available? How do we make ourselves accessible to the San Diego employees? And so we started this thing called Founders Office Hours. And so we actually allocate an hour every Friday, and it rotates between my co-founder and I, to basically, have a space for employees to kind of book meetings with us, just one-on-one talks, right? And so it could be anything from talking about the vision of the company and how their team rolls up into it. It could be a coaching session on a challenge that they're facing. We deal with a lot of culture problems, right? As any company does, right? And we kind of talk about how to solve it or just surface it up. And so that's been an amazing avenue for us to feel connected and for everyone to feel connected, right? The second is benefits, right? Everyone knows what this is, right? We have a lot of benefits customers. I'm not an expert. When we started this company, we wanted this idea of unlimited PTO, right? Pretty standard, right? We didn't like the idea of accruing a vacation. It felt too transactional for us. But we also didn't like the idea of the kind of studied unlimited PTO policy that becomes underutilized, right? And it becomes taboo to actually take vacation, right? There's a lot of studies around that. And so what we did was we branded it as minimum 12 days off, right? Not including vacation. And so what we did was, hey, we kind of decided 12 days was a healthy amount of days off. Every employee we thought could take 12 days off. And what was interesting was we actually have an anniversary program. And so you're actually not eligible to receive your experiential reward on your anniversary unless you took your full 12 days off in the prior year, right? And so on average, people take around 19 days. And it's fair, right? It's really healthy. And I think talking about it like this, encouraging days off, has led to a healthy amount of days on average, but there's no abuse, right? There's no people taking 35, 40 days off or even requesting it. So it's been nicely governed within our culture. The next component is leadership. And so this isn't about the leaders in your company, but it's about how you define leadership. What does leadership look like within your organization and how it's developed? And so this year, we went from around 25 employees at the beginning to about 85 now. We'll probably be near 100 by the end of the year. So lots of growth. We're breaking a lot of different places. Our culture is intact though, which is good. But we have a lot of young people stepping up into their first manager roles, right? Some of them are 23, 24, right? And so for us, we have an informal mentoring program where they're kind of paired up with other leaders in the company. And then we also have an L&D budget of $1,000, right? But it's pretty simple. We want to evolve this more to help kind of develop our leaders. And so I'm kind of curious, actually tapping you all, if you have any ideas on what you've seen work in kind of your organizations in terms of leadership development, or what to stay away from. Yeah.
Are you asking now?
Yeah, no, totally.
We need the mic, okay. Thanks. Sounds very similar to our company, a lot of the things that you're doing, but for us, management development, we're really working on intensifying that this year. But what we have been doing is I host a monthly roundtable, managers roundtable, and we have managers that are 23 also, never managed all the way up through veteran managers, and a lot of what we do, sometimes we'll train there, but we always make part of the roundtable breakout sessions. So we're in Zoom, we break out randomly into groups, and we do case studies, real actual things that happen in the company, and
cool.
kind of tips and tricks and solution. And then we come back together and kind of report out. So that's worked for us. People really like that.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Who owns the creation of the case study and kind of running the program?
Me.
You?
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you work with let's say it's a product case study. Are you working with the product team to kind of develop the case study?
We're a services company, so
Gotcha.
no.
Okay. Well,
we're a consulting firm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
So I would say something that we're starting to do at Wayfair, and I've seen be successful other places, are taking an inside-out approach. So yes, having the leadership development programming internally and matching up people to mentoring to difference. So making sure that we have leaders that represent different dimensions of diversity paired up with people who don't look like or share a similar background to them, so that you're finding different things to learn from different leaders through like a rotational program.
Cool.
And mixing in mentoring and coaching. But then the other thing is looking externally to say where are programmatic opportunities for us to say we're investing in you outside of here. Here's this really cool thing that you get to go do, and finding out from people that there's value in looking at specific programs that do relate to their dimension of diversity, so that they can hear from other folks in the area who might be from different industries, but who are saying like, these are the challenges that I'm facing, let's workshop that together, especially in a space where so much of the leadership looks homogenous.
Yeah. How are you, when you roll out a program like that, it sounds amazing. How are you kind of maybe profiling what this certain individual kind of needs, in terms of somebody different than their background? How are you kind of setting up that?
Yeah, so doing
initially?
an intake with these folks, right? So we have access to employee information through Workday, but you also don't want to make assumptions. So it's here are the leaders that we think would be a good fit for you for these reasons, right? Here's where you are amazing and you kick ass, and here are places where you've identified as your own gaps, and we think that this would be a great connection. Also, check out this part of their background. Start there, because it's a really cool story, and knowing that leader, when they tell that story, they kind of share some good nuggets that are great takeaways that don't feel so much like I'm teaching you in this moment, but more of we're connecting and having a conversation.
I love it. And for the mentors, kind of internally, is everyone at a certain level, kind of part of the program, or are people opting in? So I'm just curious.
No, it's a little bit of both. So when I have seen things be the most successful is identifying people where they're at and giving them the opportunity to be a mentor. So having people who are new managers mentor people who have been managing for a while, and vice versa. And then saying the more senior you get, yes, of course, there's incredible value from hearing from the C-suite, but also let's hear from some kind of more boots on the ground folks, so that you have a good sense of what's expected of me from the leadership, but what's also expected of me from the people, and then how do I make sure that both of those two things are congruent.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I have actually a question about leadership that we're kind of going through. And so kind of in this scaling up, right, a lot of times there's this inflection point of early employees sometimes not being able to level up, right? How are you guys thinking about having conversations around kind of that scaling up in an organization when you go from 100 to 300, right? Or 500 to 1,000. I saw some smiles. I'm just kind of curious, because I think those are all really hard conversations to have, right? It never feels good to kind of lose influence in a company, even though naturally as you grow, you're a smaller percentage of that company. Curious if anyone's had any conversations around that.
I think it's natural that you do lose some people along the way as you scale. The intimacy, changes. You can still have your culture intact. We've been growing pretty rapidly. You will lose some people, I think, along the way. I think we all know that. But and for us, we focus really. We do very tight performance management and career development, so people are know where they stand and know kind of what's available to them, and we offer different career paths so that people have management opportunities, but also other opportunities to grow in different ways. So.
Gotcha. No, thank you. Alrighty. Anybody else? No? Cool. All right, so the next component, places and spaces. So this is the office and the working environment, right, in which you operate. Is it conducive to collaboration? Is there built-in flexibility, right? All of these questions. And so, a couple of things we've learned over time, and pretty simple. One, people hate commuting, right? And two, at work, oftentimes, especially in meeting-heavy cultures, it's so hard to get the time to actually get work done, right? People have to come in at 6 a.m. or stay till 8 p.m. just to actually go through their emails and get their day-to-day jobs done, right? And so, kind of recognizing this, we are a meeting-heavy culture. We're trying to kind of cut that out. But we decided to implement a work from home Wednesdays, right? And so we have we want to break up the week, right, and then give Wednesdays. We kind of discourage like heavy meetings on Wednesdays, and so give people the time to put their heads down, actually focus on the work, right, not commute, and then potentially do their laundry if need be, right. And so that's been a nice kind of break in the week. A lot of companies do work from home Fridays. I think that's kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit because no one really does work on Fridays, especially from home. The last component and most important, oh yeah, what's up?
Sorry, so when you do the work from home Wednesdays, is it just like an honor system? Thank you. Is it just an honor system when you do the work from home on Wednesdays and the assumption that people are actually doing their work? Or what do you do? Is there a system where they have to check in to pick up the time and log in, log off? How do you
manage it?
How do you just manage it?
Yeah, no, totally. It's a great question. And so how we kind of position it is as a privilege, right? And so when you're onboarded and you're trained up, right, and your kind of manager feels comfortable, right, of you working from home, that's when that's when the benefit, right, will be kind of activated. Everyone works from home on Wednesdays mostly, right? And I think what's interesting and what you also bring to point is like, how do you think about cultivating trust in your employees, right? And so for us, right, like we do these things called manager readmes, right? And so basically, if you worked with somebody for 6 months, right, what would you know at like month 6 that you wish you knew on day 1, right? And so it's a little of self-reflection as a manager to write, hey, this is what I care about. This is how I show up to work. These are like what my pet peeves are. This is what annoys me. This is how I like to be communicated with, right? And so one of my things that I talk about is default trust in my README, right? We trust our hiring process, right? We go through kind of interviewing for our values. And so when we bring somebody on, right, we put default trust in them. Obviously, that trust is deepened over time, right? But we really rely on this self-governing culture to manage it, right? Because if you have a check-in process, right, you have to build technology, you might have to monitor Slack, right? It's a lot of operational and mental overhead that simply wouldn't be worth it if we had to do that, right? And so this idea of like default trust for me is like kind of like what I kind of give to my employees when they start with us. Yeah.
And I would say I'd be concerned if your first question is how do you track and monitor your employees, rather than we run on a system of we treat our employees like adults, and until there's a reason to put in a policy or track or check, we just don't. We implemented a unlimited vacation policy when we were 60 employees. We're 750 now. We haven't had to get rid of it because if anything, we have to make sure they're taking enough vacation. So I think if you have the courage to assume like people want to work hard and most of them can be trusted, you'll get so much more positive. But it is a shift of mindset because you're right. People will say, well, how do you know they're really working? Or an employee referral, oh, they'll make a bad one just to get the referral bonus. Would you? I would never put my name and endorse somebody, but upper management at some places, that's the first thing they say. So if you can act in a way that you trust your employees, you'd be surprised how they then act.
I love that. One of the things like I love to think, like I like to think in equations or formulas. It's kind of me. But trust, there's this book called The Speed of Trust, really good. And there's this formula, right, for how to think about trust. It's consistency plus dependability plus reliability divided by perceived self-interest, right? And so if you think about building trust, if I trust you, right, but I have something to gain from it, right, that lowers our trust, right? And so thinking about how you give it and then what the perceived self-interest is really important. The equation. So it's consistency plus dependability plus reliability divided by perceived self-interest, right? So it's kind of like the thing, right? If you're getting something out of it, it's not as authentic, right, of a relationship. And there's various formulas. That's the one that I like to think about. Great questions. And so the last component and most important is values, right? And this really serves as the foundation for organizational empathy and creates alignment across all the other components. And so the reason why this is so important is because it's the only component that is actually mutually shared between the company and the employees, right? And so when I said innovation is a horrible company value, and don't be shy, but innovation is a company value. Anybody have it? Okay. Thank you for being honest. So if you think about the time we're in, right? This idea of work-life integration, right? Innovation, no one's going to argue about the business imperative for it, right? Incredibly valuable, right? But your employees aren't going home thinking about being innovative, right? With their kids or doing a task, at the house, right? But if you position innovation in a different way, right? Maybe it's think differently or dream big, right? Same concept, right? But when they go home, they're working on something, they're kind of banging their head against the wall, right? They kind of say, maybe they mutter to themselves, hey, I need to think differently about this problem. Or they're with their kids and they're telling a story about Tom Brady or Wonder Woman or LeBron James, right? They say, dream big, right? If you work hard, you can do that, right? As a company, right, you want your values to be the North Star for how people operate professionally, but you also want values to inspire them personally, right? And so it becomes incredibly powerful when an employee comes into a company and they can say, hey, this is a value that I take home with me. This is a value that I live, right? It's this idea of kind of integration. And so our idea, right, is that values, the best values, need to be people-centric, right, versus company-centric. And so at Blueboard, on the first day, we do a founder session around our mission and our values. And so literally in the first hour even. And so we talk about each value. We talk about its origin, its story, how it kind of manifests itself operationally. And then we ask each new employee, to talk about what this value means to them, right? And so I'll take you through a brief little rendition of that. And so our first value is build meaningful relationships. And so my co-founder, Taylor, my best friend, I've known since third grade. We literally played basketball together growing up, super funny. Went to high school together. We were roommates after college, right? And so this company is really, it's really modeled in our friendship, right? And so I personally think, hey, if you don't build really meaningful relationships with people, if you're not doing meaningful work together, what's the point? And so this idea of build meaningful relationships is really, it's kind of our core, most important value. The second is dance a little different. And so I'm in the Boston area, so I'm going to guess people aren't familiar with the late, great Bay Area rapper, Mac Dre. Anybody? No? So Mac Dre has this saying. He says, in the Bay Area, we dance a little different. And so back when I was in high school, we used to do this thing called the hyphy movement, where you would just kind of go like this as you dance. You just stay there. And it was kind of ridiculous, right? But people would appreciate it, right? People from the Bay Area look kind of ridiculous. It's very jerky, right? But they owned it, right? And so this idea of dancing a little different, of being yourself, right? I was in a corporate world where you almost felt like you had to put on a face, right, when I came to work, right? I had to spend a lot of energy talking to the right people and, working with the right people, right? And meaningful work, right? You want to focus on the work, you want to focus on the relationships. It's not useful to expend energy trying to be somebody you're not, right? And so this value, really important to me, is just about being authentic, being the real you, right? Bringing your quirks, and so on. The third is set ourselves up for success. And so this is really about just being intentional, right? What's been cool about this value is that it's really kind of showed up in the language every day, right? And so, I think in life, in business, in startups especially, right? Many times there's only one opportunity for a certain thing, right? And you need to execute on it. And you need to put yourself in the best position to actually be successful, right? And so, even there's been times where, I've set up a meeting and, put in a kind of pretty brief agenda. And I'd be called out. Be like, hey, like, Kevin, you're not setting me up for success for this meeting. Like, I need to know when I need to come in. I'm like, I appreciate that. Thanks for holding me accountable. So this has been a really good one. And then the last one is GSD. Anybody know what GSD means? Yeah, get shit done for us. But yeah, no, totally. And so embarrassingly, this was my religious view when I was in college. I was kind of a nerd. But I think anything, you need to have an index towards action. And if you have these kind of big visions of what you want to work towards and build, at the end of the day, there's no way to dilute it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, right? And it's no sense in shying away from it. And so we need to GSD. Everyone have a sheet? So I wanted to break off like in a little workshop. And so the idea is going to be to kind of list out your own company values and kind of rank them, if they're people-centric versus company-centric, what's working well, what's not, how would you reposition them if they are, and then kind of share in groups, and we'll kind of share. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so the question was, how do we promote? How do we come up with our company values? So that's a great question. And so we didn't come up with our values for about 14, 15 months, right? And the idea is I don't like values that feel aspirational, that like you feel like you always can't hit, right? And so this idea of uncovering your values, right, is, hey, values aren't things that you define and shoot for, but they're part of kind of your operating system. They're part of who you are, right? And so after kind of a little over a year, we sat down and we just like, hey, who are we as a company? And that process of uncovering them is how I like to kind of put it, versus like creating them. That makes sense? Yeah. Cool. All right, so yeah, we'll kind of get together, talk for about five minutes. What's up? Groups of like 2 to 3, and we'll kind of share, and then we'll talk as a group. Break. Alrighty. So want to come together as a group and have some people share? I know people are still kind of in conversation. We'd love to hear what you discussed, how you could change the narrative of a company-centric value, maybe a people-centric value that you think is working really well. Anybody want to share? Basically wanted to come together as a group and have you share what you're talking about either a company-centric value that you think you could kind of change the narrative of, or maybe a value you have that is really people-centric and doing really well for your organization. Anybody? Yeah.
Something I'm trying to figure out myself is one of our values is the customer first. And I think there's so much greatness to that as a company, a for-profit company, but also challenges when you do work focused on people, right? And the internal people who are making it possible for the customer. So that's a challenging one for me.
And so I guess a question I would have for that is, is there the opportunity to put the spin on who are our internal customers, right? But then how does that compete, right? If everybody is your customer and the customer is always right and you're in opposition. So yeah, that's interesting, tricky. Thanks for allowing us to have this back and forth.
And how do you think about, just kind of brainstorming, how do you think about positioning that or evolving that value? It can just be initial thoughts.
I'm working through it.
Yeah, no, totally. So, actually it's really interesting, right? I was just at Zappos this past week for a conference, and Tony Hsieh was talking about holacracy. Everyone know what holacracy is? So it's a new organizational kind of design of people being less hierarchical and focused on circles of work. And how holacracy has evolved for Zappos, it's actually turned into this thing called market-based dynamics, right? Where essentially every team is its own mini company, right? And so you think of legal, right? And legal needs to support procurement, they need to support sales, they need to support the HR team, right? And so they actually have structured it where they have agreements with the sales team, with the HR team. And so they are literal customers. There are literally internal customers of the legal team that they structure it in. And it's still like really new, but it's really interesting. And Tony's whole thing around it is like, how do we structure companies more like cities, right?
Market-based what?
Market-based dynamics, right? It's super interesting, right? Studies have shown that cities with a double in population, productivity per resident goes up 15%. But when a company doubles, productivity does not go up, right? It goes down. So thinking about how to self-govern like cities, which is interesting. But something to think about. It's hard. Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah.
So we have this value that's called manager-doer. I hate the way it sounds, but in theory, what it is that like nobody is above doing the work, right? So even if I'm in a leadership position, I'm still getting down with the engineers and like doing coding and helping them through it. Like it doesn't matter what level you're at. And so for me, it's we don't necessarily talk about it in that very humanistic way.
Yeah.
It's just the like, no, you would never build a team where there's a layer of people doing this stuff and you're thinking about strategy. But that is kind of how we operate at certain levels. And so I'm trying to figure out how do we, one, make that true, and two, either rename it or do something that helps people to understand where the true value of that mindset comes from. And it's that like having humility and helping others grow and this really positive thing, but we're not kind of talking about it in that way.
Yeah. One of the things that we like to do, and I think it's great, is like, how do your leaders model it, right? And then telling those stories, right? When you think about the best cultures, right? They share stories, right? They're storytellers. And so if you're able to tell those stories when it's modeled, that's super important, right? Yeah, something to think about, yeah. I saw this group talking a lot.
I'll just say that at our organization, we've really capitalized on this concept of storytellers. We have, in our various offices across North America, we have propped this up, kind of like TED Talks, where we encourage people to talk about their experiences both within the organization as well as outside the organization, because I think it goes back to this point about being authentic to your true self and who that person is, and bringing your whole self to work, right?
Yeah.
And if we continue to encourage these types of conversations, then maybe a manager will learn a little bit more about an employee, or an employee can learn more about a manager's experiences and where they may be struggling to be the best manager or be the best employee. So
Yeah.
I just want to speak to that.
Cool. One thing that we do that you kind of remind me of is that we have employee-driven lunch and learns. And so you can almost kind of create your own topic. As long as it's at lunchtime, it's broadcasted over Zoom, but people, that's where they kind of flex their storytelling, and I love, there's something almost like every 2 weeks where people are just, it could be a lunch and learn on buying your first home, right? It could be lunch and learn on, hey, what is the customer success team doing, because no one knows what they're doing, right? So it could be a variety of things, but that storytelling element is super important to just have constantly, yeah. Alrighty.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Woo, that's loud. Thank you guys so much. Thanks to Kevin.
Yeah,
really
thank you.
appreciate it. You guys, Blueboard, which is an awesome company, as you just learned, they have a booth over at the end over there. So if you guys want to continue the conversation, as I'm sure you do, you can find Kevin there after the session. And now it's lunchtime. So thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.